as Gruber mentioned, my name is J.D. Ray, and I will be presenting the Pacific Northwest in the 66th Gypsy Brigade of World War I. Now, before I continue, is there anybody here who is related to anybody who served in this outfit during World War I? I know you guys are. Well, thank you for your service to our nation during World War I. If it wasn't for your ancestors' service to our country, this project and this book would not be possible. Thank you. Yeah. Now, before I get into the United States involvement in World War I, I'll touch bases briefly on the origins of the conflict and how we got involved in it. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austrian throne, is assassinated in Sarajevo, Serbia in June of 1914. His death would snowball and spark the warring parties of the Allies with the countries of France, England, and Russia, and Belgium against the Central Powers of Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, excuse me.
And Italy.
And Italy as well, on the Central Power side. The fighting, most of the heavy fighting in World War I occurs on the European continent. When the German military attempts to invade France through Belgium, that attack through Belgium stagnates, and the Western Front, as it is known, stagnates into trench combat, probably the most well-known aspect of World War I today. The United States, however, from 1914, does not get involved for another 3 years in the conflict. They only side with the Allies in April of 1917 after events such as the German sinking of the RMS Lusitania in 1916, which the ship has American citizens on board, and the German telegram to Mexico that was trying to persuade Mexico to invade the United States from the south. And as I mentioned, the United States declares war on Germany after these events in April of 1917. Now, a major issue that the United States military has entering World War I is manpower. There was only about 100,000 men in the U.S. military in 1917 entering the conflict. In response to this, the War Department and the U.S. military hires General John Pershing, who has a much better mustache than myself, to command what was known as the American Expeditionary Forces, or AEF for short. The AEF is built with a series of divisions, numbered 1 to 100, and each division numbers about 30,000 men. By the end of World War I, the U.S. military will number in about 4 million men by 1919. This chart on the left depicts all the divisions that were formed in the U.S. military during World War I. Our focus this evening will be centered within the 41st Sunset Division, which it consists of federalized National Guard troops from the states of Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and for our purposes this afternoon, the states of Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. Under the command of General Hunter Liggett, also the proud owner of a very nice mustache. The 41st Division is organized with the 81st and 82nd Infantry Brigades, with the 66th Field Artillery Brigade in support. Within the 66th Brigade, you have the 146th Field Artillery, the 147th, and the 148th. For our purposes during this presentation, we will not be focusing on the 147th. They see detached service from the 66th Brigade when the 41st Division arrives in France in early 1918. The first National Guard troops I will be talking about is the 2nd Idaho Infantry Regiment, who are based out of Boise, Rathdrum, and Coeur d'Alene. Under the command of Colonel William Edelbute, these men, upon their arrival to the 41st Division, are federalized into the 146th Field Artillery Regiment. They serve in the regiment's headquarters, supply company, medical, Battery B, and Battery C. The next Pacific Northwest outfit of National Guard to come from our neck of the woods is the 1st Oregon Cavalry Regiment, who are stationed out of Pendleton and Portland, Oregon. These men, unlike the Idaho men, would serve in the 41st Division's 148th Field Artillery Regiment. Most of the 148th consists of men from the states of Wyoming and Colorado, so the Oregon men are a little bit of an oddball in the unit. These men from Oregon would serve in the 148th's headquarters, Supply Company, Battery C, and Battery D. When the 1st Oregon Cavalry Regiment ship out to serve in World War I with the 41st Division, they formed their troops at Camp Clackamas, Oregon. This is a series of photos provided for our research from the Pendleton Public Library, depicting men of Troop D, as you'll note on the mascot dog, of the 1st Oregon Cavalry Regiment. These were taken in 1917 before these men shipped out to France. And if you note these stars next to these many faces, these stars signify that these particular men did not make it back to the United States after World War I. They were killed in action in Europe. Last but not least, we have the 1st Battalion, Washington Field Artillery from Fort Walla Walla. This is the brainchild of one Colonel William Wayark, who is a Walla Walla resident and Spanish-American War veteran, who petitions to the Washington National Guard and the Militia Bureau to form an ad hoc unit of artillery on old Fort Walla Walla grounds. His request is accepted, and after training here at Fort Walla Walla, his men serve in the 146th Field Artillery Regiment. Battery D of the 146th consists of Walla Walla men, Battery E with men from Benton and Yakima counties, and Battery F with men from Spokane. And here is what is known as a yard-long panoramic photo that's about a yard long and horizontal length, depicting men of what would be Battery D of the 146th Field Artillery here at Fort Walla Walla. Note the Fort Walla Walla buildings in the background, which are now part of the VA hospital, and the mascot dog in the bottom right corner. Also, during their time at Fort Walla Walla, the 1st Battalion Washington Field Artillery men, although they are artillery, they do not have any guns to train with. To make up for that lack of equipment, they put together wagon wheels and cut down logs to simulate artillery training and gun drills here at Fort Walla Walla. Note the buildings in the background as well. Now, the 41st Division amasses its troops at Camp Green, North Carolina. That's a typo. I meant to put north, not south, which is a training base that does not exist prior to America's entry into World War I in 1917. When the men of the 41st Division show up, there's no permanent barracks, and many of the men have to sleep out in pup tents. Now imagine North Carolina in the fall. It's kind of humorous to read through some of the stories of these men after World War I. Many of them complain that Camp Green was the worst posting that they had been to of the conflict, to include combat in France. So they complained the most about Camp Green. At Camp Green, the 66th Brigade is exposed to their first training with live fire drills with M1902 field guns. These cannons would fire a 3-inch projectile at a range of about 3.5 miles at a firing rate of 15 rounds a minute. These guns were operated by a crew of about 5 to 7 men. Now that might seem impressive, but these were not state-of-the-art by 1917, especially compared to the guns that were being used in Europe during World War I. To compare and show what the U.S. was getting into, these are photos of the battlefield in France and German equipment during the war. The cannon on the left is known as a Paris gun. It fired a 230 millimeter projectile at a range of over 80 miles. This particular gun fired shells into the French capital of Paris in early 1918 and caused mass pandemonium in the city. The Germans were masters at artillery warfare during the conflict. The photo on the right is the city of Passchendaele in Belgium before and after World War I. And you can just see, it's a little hard to make it out, but all those little dots are shell holes from artillery. World War I artillery warfare was on an attritional industrial scale. Millions of shells fired and thousands of field guns used on both sides during the war. More combat casualties will occur in the battlefields of World War I from artillery than any other weapon, period. More so than machine guns or mustard gas. To combat the lack of equipment, the U.S. military adopts French equipment to make up for the lack of American-produced field guns. The cannon used by the 66th Brigade is the 155 GPF, produced in 1917, so they were fairly new, which fired a 155 millimeter projectile, like the one we have here, and at a range of about 12 miles. These fired about 2 rounds a minute and weighed a whopping 28,000 pounds. These were definitely no M1902s for sure. Now, a question that I've been asked here at the museum since taking this research on is, did the cannons on Fort Walla Walla, currently on Fort Walla Walla grounds, did they fire cannonballs? The answer is no. They fired a 155 millimeter cone-shaped projectile during World War I. In fact, the U.S. military still uses this round in the modern day. And this photo is men of the 66th Brigade after World War I, posing with a shell and powder charges that would propel the shell downrange when it was fired. This is a full-size gun crew, about 12 to 15 men, again, much more than the M1902s. And the M1902 was horse-drawn, but the 155 GPF, due to its weight, had to be towed by tractors. During the war, the terrain crossed by the 66th Brigade was so bad at times that single guns had to be towed by 2 or 3 tractors at a time. So it's they really were got busy with the tractors for sure. This is General John Pershing, an American Secretary of War Newton Baker, inspecting the 146th at Camp de Souge, France in early 1918 when they were training with their new French cannons. Note the regimental colors here on the right side of the photo. Now, if you remember back to my opening slide, you might have seen this Gypsy nickname. I wonder, did I give that nickname to these men? I did not. This was a nickname given to these men by themselves due to how much they moved around during World War I. They moved around a lot, as shown by this graph. The 41st Division, upon its arrival in France, is split up as a replacement division. The 66th Brigade from that point goes to the American 1st Corps in early 1918. Then it is split up with the French 6th Army in July of 1918. Then they're reunited again in mid-July of 18. The American 1st Army in August of 1918. The American 4th and 5th Corps in September. The American 3rd Corps in mid-September of 18. The American 3rd Army of Occupation in November 1918 after World War I ends. And then finally, the American National Guard once the 66th Brigade arrives back to the United States. This is a graphic I put together depicting divisions of the American Expeditionary Forces in the center, being supported by the 66th Brigade in the bottom left, the 148th with the letter Buck, and the 146th with the cross cannons, firing shells over these divisions, represented by the arrow, onto the Imperial German Army in the bottom right corner. Now, the first battle I will be covering is the Einmarn defensive and offensive operations, which takes place between July and August of 1918. The 66th Brigade and her 2 regiments of field artillery are split between the American 1st Corps and French 6th Army, where they fire close to 50,000 155 millimeter shells into German lines. 23 men from the 66th Brigade are killed in action during this battle, 8 of whom called the Pacific Northwest home. Note the divisions that the 66th Brigade supported, and this is the city of Chateau-Thierry after the battle. This is a photo of a single battery from the 146th on a July 4th parade on the way to the front in the village of Clermont-Ferrand in France. I thought this photo was really cool. They're all wearing, they all have Springfield M1903s, and note the guidon on the far left. Now, this is probably a little difficult to make out. I'll do my best to kind of point out areas of interest on this. But this is a map depicting the opening stages of the Einmarn defensive operation, which occurs on July 15th of 1918. The city of Chateau-Thierry along the Marne River is here in the center. And to the east of the city, where the river bends northward, the Germans launched a final offensive, which was the end of their, what was called the spring offensives that began in March of 1918, south across the Marne River into the defenses of the 3rd and 28th American Divisions. Supporting them with artillery is the American 1st Corps, with the 146th Field Artillery's 1st and 3rd Battalions. And then in the south, you have the French 6th Army with the 2nd Battalion of the 146th and the entire 148th Field Artillery Regiment. During the battle, when the Germans crossed the river, French forces here in the south are unaware of how far the Germans had pushed south of the Marne, and they give charges of dynamite to the men in the 66th Brigade, telling them to scuttle their guns, get rid of all of it, the Germans are coming. Luckily, our men did not do that, and they continued firing into German positions here so well that it is reported that pontoon bridges that the Germans erect across the river that are no more than 6 feet at their widest are destroyed by shells at ranges more than 10 miles. They were very, very accurate with their guns. And here's a photo depicting the German side of the river on the Marne in the 3rd Division sector. You can just see the absolute carnage that was brought on the enemy there. After the battle, General Joseph Dickman of the 3rd Division reported that on the front of the 3rd Division, there are no Germans south of the Marne except the dead. There that day was one Sergeant Huron Red Lake, who some of you might recognize as the father of our late Bill Lake. Sergeant Lake was there at the Battle of Chateau-Thierry at the defense when he was pulled out of combat and sent back to the United States to train new recruits in the French cannons. On his return back to the United States, he was interviewed about his experiences at Chateau-Thierry, and I actually had the honor of sharing that interview with Bill Lake before he passed away. He didn't know that it had existed. Sergeant Lake's uniform is currently on display in our military exhibit here at the museum. Immediately after the action at Chateau-Thierry, the American 1st Corps launches an immediate counterattack to the west of the city northward to close in the German army and their gains from their spring offensives in 1918. The 66th Brigade follows up behind the 26th, the 28th, the 42nd Rainbow Division, which has a very young General Douglas MacArthur among its ranks, and the American 4th Division. The Germans order a general withdrawal from the area, but they do leave behind pockets of resistance in this entire area during the battle. The offensive does slow down as the Germans reoccupy trenches up here in the north that they had built up since 1914. This is a photo of a gun crew from the 146th Field Artillery on July 22nd, 1918, during live fire operations. And this is a photo of a single gun, a Battery B of the 148th, in August of 1918. Notice it's firing, and the camouflage net over the gun position. This was necessary to do because artillery positions during World War I were favorite targets of opposing artillery and aerial observation, such as barrage balloons and aircraft. There at the offensive from the Iron Marne are two Walla Walla brothers, Conrad and Henry Hoff, who were both serving in Battery D of the 146th Field Artillery Regiment. On July 27, 1918, Conrad is operating a French 155mm cannon when it prematurely detonates a shell in its breech, which kills him, one other man, and injures 12 other American soldiers nearby. His brother Henry not only witnesses this, but also helps bury his brother's remains in France, not too far from where he lost his life. In a letter back to their cousin, Henry writes that I can say he was a good soldier and a kind, loving brother to me. He gave his life to God and his country, and may God rest them both in peace forever. And this flag is in the collection here at the museum. This is the 48-star flag that covered Conrad's remains when his body was disinterred from France and brought back to here in Walla Walla in 1921. He's currently buried at Mountain View Cemetery. Not too long after the action at the Iron Marne, the 66th Brigade is then ordered to take part in the St. Mihiel offensive, which is southeast of the city of Verdun. The battle takes place between September 12th and 15th, 1918. The 146th and 148th is split between the American 4th and 5th Corps and fire close to 7,000 shells onto German positions. 2 men from the brigade are killed in action. Overall, much quicker than the Iron Marne defensive and the offense. Here's a map depicting the battle there at St. Mihiel. Notice it's in a salient. This was held by the Germans since 1914, and the French had tried to take it several times over the course of the war. John Pershing promised the French that he would take it. In the north, you have the American 5th Corps with the 4th divisions, the 4th and 26th divisions supported by the 146th Artillery. In the south, you have the American 5th Corps with its leading divisions of the 1st, 42nd, and 89th, supported by artillery from the 148th. Again, this battle is very, very quick. However, immediately after the battle at St. Mihiel, the 66th Brigade is ordered to take part in the largest American offensive in U.S. military history up to 1918, the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. It takes place between September 26th and November 11th, 1918. This is the last day of the war, and they are assigned to the American 3rd Corps. They fire close to 82,000 shells into German lines and are among 2,800 American cannons which take part in a preliminary bombardment onto German lines during the first day of the battle. The Meuse-Argonne fires on the American side, the Americans fire so many shells into German lines that it accounts for more rounds fired than both sides of the American Civil War combined during the entirety of the American Civil War. 24 men from the 66th Brigade are killed in action, 11 of whom are from the Pacific Northwest. And this is a photo of a 155 millimeter gun firing at night. There that day, on the first day of the Meuse Argonne, was our 33rd President of the United States, Harry Truman, who was an artilleryman himself, who stated that the sky was red from one end to the other from the artillery flashes. We were deaf as a post from the noise. And here is a map depicting the actions in the 3rd Corps sector between September 26th and late October of 1918. The 3rd Corps, on the first day of the offensive, gets rather lucky. They make the most ground for the American military during this battle. Luckily, because of the Meuse River to its east and the Meuse River Heights, held by the Germans still, a fog rolls in from the east, covering up the American advance, which includes the 4th Division, the 80th Division, and the 33rd Division. However, the 3rd Corps' luck would eventually run out, and the American military would pummel German defenses in a series of trenches and concrete pillboxes known as the Hindenburg Line, represented by this red dashed line here on the map. Eventually, after a period of rest, the AEF does push through the Hindenburg Line and beyond. During this period, too, the 66th Brigade is exposed to heavy German artillery fire and long-range German machine guns. This is another map depicting the latter stages of the Meuse Argonne. The 3rd Corps does push through the Hindenburg Line, and as you can see, the battlefield opens up much more towards the end of the war. The 66th Brigade does report that they are firing shells to the last possible second on November 11th, 1918. They were fighting right up to the end of it. Killed during the Meuse Argonne is Corporal John Fust of Walla Walla. He's currently buried at Mountain View Cemetery. Sergeant Major Kenneth Brown of Idaho, whose remains are in France. And Private Frank Parks of Pendleton, Oregon, who's buried in Pendleton. All three of these men are among casualties occurred from wounds from German artillery fire onto their gun positions. Immediately after World War I, the 66th Brigade isn't really given a rest. They're ordered to report to the American Third Army of Occupation between November 1918 and May 1919. The 66th Brigade is tasked with holding a bridgehead near the city of Koblenz, Germany. And yet still, even after the war has ended, 37 men would lose their lives in active duty military service to things such as the Spanish flu, which was rife in 1918 and 1919, and accidents. 13 of those casualties come from the Pacific Northwest. Here's a photo depicting tractors and cannons of the 146th Artillery on their way through Luxembourg to Germany in late 1918. During their time in Germany, the 66th Brigade produces a newspaper known as the Long Range Sniper. In this newspaper, there are things such as comics, sports events, maps of where the 66th Brigade had served during the war, and even announcements of death of certain soldiers in the two regiments. We're lucky enough here at the museum to have a copy of almost every division, or every edition that was published during the war, or after the war, technically. Also during their time in Germany, the 66th Brigade is awarded what's called battle screamers, They represent the different engagements that a particular unit had participated in during World War I. This is part of an archive film depicting the regimental colors of the 148th Field Artillery being decorated with these streamers. This is the exact flag that is in that film, which was provided for our research from the Wyoming National Guard. The whereabouts of the 146th colors are currently unknown. We're still trying to track that down. Also during their time in Germany, men of the 66th Brigade and American soldiers at large were very avid souvenir hunters. And the area of Germany that they were stationed in were very prominent makers of ceramic items. The 66th Brigade chose to have beer steins, these two on the ends, and then humidors. The 148th, of course, having the letter buck, and the 146th with the cross cannons. Many of these, as you can see from this stein, you can't see it on the lids because they're facing up. Many of these items were individualized by the men that ordered them. Ceramics weren't the only thing that 66th Brigade men took back after the war. These are all items here within the collections of the museum that 146th men took back. Things such as spiked helmets, cigar cases, bayonets, what were called hate belts, which were usually like leather belts with like buttons attached to them, and medals. Anything was fair game for an American soldier in World War I. The 66th Brigade and its two regiments eventually made their way back to the United States in June of 1919 aboard ships, and most of the men in the regiments were discharged from the military. However, before their discharge, many of the units within the 66th Brigade had their photos taken on the East Coast. That's where this photo comes from. This was taken in New York, which depicts Battery E of the 146th Field Artillery, which, if you may remember, is the Benton and Yakima County Battery of the 146th. And this is a World War I guidon, also provided to us by the Wyoming National Guard for Battery E of the 148th Field Artillery. In total, the 66th Brigade would fire close to 140,000 155 millimeter shells during World War I, which accounted for over half of all shells of that caliber fired by the entire American military during World War I. So they did a lot of whopping during the war. In the 66th Brigade, 110 men would lose their lives, 37 of whom were from the Pacific Northwest. This comic I always found quite humorous. This is how Battery C would go over the top. And it's kind of hard to make out, but they affixed a bayonet to the end of their cannon, charging the Germans. Now we get into probably one of my more favorite topics from World War I, uniforms. This is a uniform that was worn by a sergeant in the 146th Field Artillery, which is currently housed here at the collections of the museum. Note the collar disc with 146 on it and the 41st Division insignia on the left shoulder. The 148th also applied patches to their uniforms with the letter Buck insignia. This uniform was for a sergeant in the 148th. Very unusual to have two patches applied to a World War I uniform. And this uniform was provided to us for our research that belongs to Private Murdoch McDonald, Battery D of the 148th. He was from Detroit, but he was a replacement in Battery D of the 148th, which, if you may remember, is the Pendleton, Oregon battery. Insignia also made their way to helmets. These are two examples of painted helmets done by the actual men themselves of the 146th and the 148th Field Artilleries. And now, arguably, the largest and most historically significant bring back from World War I being the 2 French cannons here on Fort Walla Walla grounds. The origin of how these got to Walla Walla traces back to one Sergeant Frank Bigler, Battery D of the 146th, who posed the idea to Colonel Wayark on their return back to the United States, stating that it would be awful nice to bring those guns back. And apparently the colonel liked that idea. The colonel then reached out to his friend, Washington House of Representatives member John Summers, Washington, D.C., and they both used the excuse of a new Washington National Guard outfit in Walla Walla to bring the exact guns of the 146th to the city. Surprisingly, their plan works. And the cannons, which were located at Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, were shipped to Walla Walla in 1920 to be used by the National Guard. Had Colonel Wayark and Summers not pulled the cannons from Aberdeen, they would have been repurposed and recycled to more than likely be used in the military up through World War II. So who knows where they would have gone from there. This is a photo of Aberdeen and just the heaps of material there after World War I. You note the long-barreled cannons there of the 155s. Much of the French equipment that the U.S. military used in World War I was purchased and brought back to the United States. June 1920, newspapers reported that the 4 cannons of Battery D of the 146th, which there were originally 4 here in town, arrived by 4 boxcars to the Walla Walla train station. The cannons are then temporarily stored by the Washington National Guard in the fairgrounds here in town. However, the fate of the cannons would hang in the balance. By 1924, the artillery troops here in town were converted into infantry and moved to Camp Murray. Colonel Wayark and 41st Division veteran Captain Jasper Reynolds, his first name's Jasper, right? Yep. However, intervened when the National Guard moves out of town. They petitioned to the Washington National Guard and the Militia Bureau to loan the cannons to the city of Walla Walla on the grounds that they are sentimental to the men of the 146th here in town. That plan also works, and the cannons make their way to Pioneer Park here in town, where all 4 cannons are placed on concrete platforms and face East Aller Street. Residents living across from these cannons complain to the city of Walla Walla in fear that neighborhood kids would load a shell into a cannon and fire it into their house. Now tell me the last time you saw a World War I shell in a public park. For the most part, that sentiment toward these guns was not commonplace here in town. Many Walla Walla residents enjoyed these guns in town. They represented the town's service to our nation during World War I. Now, James and myself were sorting through some of Norm Adams' items, and this was new news to me. I found out that Fred Adams, Norm Adams' father, served in the 146th Field Artillery during World War I. This is him in 1918. And this is a photo we ran across depicting Fred and Norm Adams on one of the barrels of the cannons in Pioneer Park. This is one of the very few photos that I've seen that depicts one of the cannons when it was at Pioneer Park. Between 1924 and 1927, the cannons sat at Pioneer Park, but they were still technically the property of the Washington National Guard. However, Representative Summers would see that change in February 1927 during the 69th Congress, when he took the Senate floor and petitioned to have the guns become the property of the city of Walla Walla. His defense in this petition is that the cannons here in town were used so much in World War I that the barrels are completely shot out and they wouldn't be able to fire any shells safely. To back up his claim is Sergeant Frank Bigler. He travels to Washington, D.C. and gives a first-hand account of his combat experiences in France. He ends his talk with, "We who are overseas with these guns want them kept here. We think if the public can but understand us, can but understand what they really mean to us, that the public will help us." It passes the Senate floor, and the cannons become the property of the city of Walla Walla. However, the fate of the guns would hang in the balance once more after the Second World War starts with the U.S. involvement in the conflict. November 11th, 1942, about less than a year after Pearl Harbor and the anniversary of the end of World War I, the 4 cannons are selected to be used for scrap for the war effort. 2 of the cannons are left in Pioneer Park, and the other 2 are brought up Main Street in a parade led by Frank Bigler, and then brought to the Army airfield where they're to be split up for scrap. However, that plan stalls. One of the cannons at the airfield is successfully torn up. The other cannon, however, puts up a little bit of a fight. An Army airfield worker is cutting part of the cannon apart with a blowtorch when a pressurized recoil chamber ignites in his face, permanently blinding the man and burning him severely. It is decided that the other 2 cannons in Pioneer Park are going to be left alone. This is a first-hand account of someone who was working at the Army airfield in World War II of that particular incident. From Pioneer Park, the 2 existing cannons are brought to Walla Walla High School, where they are used as dummy drill cannons for the cadets. And then 1946, the cannons are then moved to Fort Walla Walla grounds, where the VA hospital was at. This is a photo taken around 1950, depicting men of the 146th, to include Frank Bigler, posing with one of the cannons in front of the Old Fort Cemetery. In 1962, living veterans of the 146th pooled together and performed a light restoration of the cannons here on Fort Walla Walla grounds. They're painted light gray. Then they are left at their state for several decades. And this is how the cannons looked in the 2000s here on Fort Walla Walla grounds. Beginning in the early 2000s, led by the Loose Cannon Committee, the 2 existing cannons received donations from the Walla Walla community to have them restored. By November 11th, 2009, in cooperation with RDL Machine and their partners in the Walla Walla Valley, the two cannons are sandblasted, repainted, and remounted on a concrete platform where they exist today. Now, looking at this picture, you can see I've added names. And this isn't something I made up either. These were actually names given to these cannons by the men that used them in World War I. The gun on the left, with barrel number 602, was named Jenny. And then the cannon on the right, with its barrel pointed upwards, and it has a barrel number 740 on it, had 2 contradicting nicknames for it, Cleopatra and Pansy. For several years, the exact name for that particular gun was not known. That was until about 2011. The ancestors of one Sergeant Ezra Post of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, who served in Battery D of the 146th. His ancestors donated his World War I items to the museum, where it was discovered that his wife's name was Pansy. This is their wedding photo that was taken several days before Ezra shipped out to France during World War I. And he was in charge of gun number 740, where he painted the name Pansy on the barrel of the gun. There you go. That last cannon's name is painted. And with all that said, there was a lot of information to cover in the span that I did. We have enough time for questions? Yeah, cool. Yeah, any questions anyone might have? Yes?
Okay, so you said that they kept shooting up until the last hour of armistice. Do you know why that was?
Military doctrine during World War I was really land grab. And so men all across the American military on both sides even received word that an armistice was going into effect at 11 a.m. It had been signed, I think, at 5 in the morning. So the Allies were the ones negotiating the armistice, and they wanted to end on November 11th at 11 because it sounded good. So to put it bluntly, it is really a shame that men continued to fight up until 11 a.m. when it could have ended, earlier. It was just kind of like we're going to keep fighting until the last second, So, yeah. I hope did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of a silly question, but I'm not really from this area, and I always thought the letter Buck was just Pendleton. How did it get into the war? Was it always
So the Pendleton has evidence that for the roundup that they did use the letter Buck before World War I. Interestingly, from what I understand, again, I'm not part of the Wyoming National Guard, but the Wyoming letter Buck traces back to a man in the 148th. He essentially provided the idea of the letter Buck on the silhouetted back, like the silhouette of the horse, and then that kind of snowballed the insignia throughout Wyoming, and then it became adopted. So, and then of course the Pendleton men wore this patch too. So it's pretty interesting to see it like across the country too. The same insignia. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
What are you doing this weekend?
Oh, I was going to get to that. Yeah, I'll get to that. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. Well, that concludes my after hours. Thank you for coming. It has been an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to present this and work on this project here at the museum. I will be here for a little while longer, and also during the entire World Wars weekend. We'll have a couple tables set up with some other World War I items. Yeah, thank you.